On October 25, 1944, Commander Ernest Evans stood on the bridge of USS Johnston, a Fletcher-class destroyer, and watched the horizon darken with silhouettes of the most powerful naval force ever assembled to hunt American carriers. 4 Japanese battleships, including Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers bore down on his position. Yamato alone displaced over 70,000 tons and carried 9 18-inch guns, the most powerful naval artillery ever mounted on a warship. Each shell weighed more than a small automobile. Johnston displaced 2,100 tons. The destroyer carried 5 5-inch guns and 10 torpedo tubes. In any rational assessment, the upcoming battle represented suicide. Evans and his crew faced impossible odds against overwhelming firepower. The correct tactical decision was to lay smoke, screen the vulnerable escort carriers behind them, and attempt escape while faster Japanese warships closed the distance and annihilated the slower carriers. Evans made a different choice. He ordered his helmsman to turn directly toward the Japanese fleet. Johnston would attack. The destroyer accelerated to flank speed, racing toward battleships 40 times its size. Evans intended to close to torpedo range, launch his weapons, and engage with guns. He would charge directly into the most powerful surface force Japan could assemble, knowing his ship would almost certainly be destroyed. But perhaps Johnston could slow the enemy advance, buy time for the escort carriers to escape, and inflict damage disproportionate to the destroyer's size. This decision, made in seconds during chaos of unexpected battle, would define the most extraordinary naval engagement in American history. The Battle off Samar would pit a handful of escort carriers, destroyers, and destroyer escorts against a Japanese surface fleet specifically designed to annihilate American invasion forces. The battle should have been a massacre resulting in destruction of multiple carriers and thousands of American casualties. Instead, it became testament to courage, aggressive tactics, and willingness to sacrifice everything to protect others. USS Johnston's story represents more than one ship's gallantry. It exemplifies the destroyer spirit that defined American naval warfare during World War II. Aggressive, bold, willing to engage opponents far more powerful, accepting terrible odds to accomplish the mission. The destroyer's actions during 3 hours of combat off Samar Island earned it a Presidential Unit Citation and its commander a posthumous Medal of Honor. The ship and most of its crew were lost, but their sacrifice helped save an entire task force from destruction. The strategic situation leading to the Battle off Samar began weeks earlier as American forces invaded the Philippines in October 1944. The Philippines represented Japan's last defensive barrier protecting access to oil resources in the Dutch East Indies and raw materials from Southeast Asia. Losing the Philippines would sever Japan's maritime supply lines, making continued prosecution of the war nearly impossible. Japanese military planners recognized this strategic reality and prepared a desperate counterstroke designed to destroy American invasion forces. The plan, called Shogo, or Victory Operation, represented Japan's final major naval offensive of the war. Japanese commanders would commit virtually their entire remaining surface fleet in coordinated attacks against American landing forces in Leyte Gulf. The operation divided Japanese naval forces into 3 groups approaching from different directions, hoping to overwhelm American defenses through simultaneous attacks. The southern force would approach through Surigao Strait from the south. The northern force, built around Japan's remaining aircraft carriers, would approach from the northeast. These carriers carried few aircraft and served primarily as bait, intended to lure American fast carriers away from the invasion area. The most powerful group, Center Force under Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, would transit San Bernardino Strait and emerge off Samar Island, positioned to attack the vulnerable invasion anchorage and shipping in Leyte Gulf. Center Force represented the most powerful Japanese surface fleet assembled since Midway. Kurita commanded 5 battleships, including the super battleships Yamato and Musashi, 10 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 15 destroyers. This force possessed overwhelming firepower advantage over anything American commanders expected to encounter off Samar. The battleships alone mounted guns ranging from 14 inches to Yamato's massive 18-inch rifles. The heavy cruisers carried 8-inch guns and torpedoes. Combined, Center Force could deliver devastating salvos capable of destroying carriers and screening forces within minutes. American intelligence detected Japanese fleet movements but initially misinterpreted Japanese intentions. Admiral William Halsey, commanding the powerful Third Fleet with its fast battleships and fleet carriers, believed the Japanese carrier force approaching from the northeast represented the primary threat. When American aircraft located the Japanese carriers, Halsey made a fateful decision. He took his entire force north to engage and destroy the Japanese carriers, leaving San Bernardino Strait unguarded. Halsey's decision was not entirely unreasonable. American doctrine prioritized destroying enemy carriers. The Japanese carriers, even with reduced air groups, represented potential threats to American operations. Halsey also believed he had inflicted sufficient damage on Center Force during air attacks on October 24th that Kurita would withdraw rather than continue toward Leyte Gulf. American pilots reported sinking multiple battleships and heavy cruisers. These reports, though somewhat exaggerated, suggested Center Force had been crippled. But Kurita had not withdrawn. Despite losing the super battleship Musashi to sustained air attacks and suffering damage to other vessels, Center Force continued toward San Bernardino Strait. During the night of October 24th to 25th, Kurita's fleet transited the strait and turned south along the coast of Samar Island. No American forces guarded the strait. The way to Leyte Gulf lay open. The only American naval forces off Samar were 3 groups of escort carriers designated Taffy 1, Taffy 2, and Taffy 3. These were not fleet carriers like those with Halsey's Third Fleet. Escort carriers were converted merchant hulls, slow, lightly armored, carrying small air groups primarily intended for ground support and anti-submarine warfare. They possessed minimal defensive armament and could not survive sustained surface combat against heavy warships. Taffy 3, commanded by Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague, operated furthest north, directly in Kurita's path. Sprague's force consisted of 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts. The carriers were Fanshawe Bay, St. Lo, White Plains, Kalinan Bay, Kitkoon Bay, and Gambier Bay. The 3 destroyers were Johnston, Howell, and Heermann. The destroyer escorts were Dennis, John C. Butler, Raymond, and Samuel B. Roberts. Against Kurita's 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers, Taffy 3 was hopelessly outmatched. The escort carriers could launch aircraft, but their planes carried bombs and rockets intended for ground support, not armor-piercing weapons effective against battleships. The destroyers and destroyer escorts provided anti-submarine and anti-aircraft screening, but were not designed to fight battleships in surface combat. Commander Ernest Evans had assumed command of Johnston in October 1943, shortly after the destroyer's commissioning. Evans was Cherokee from Oklahoma, a Naval Academy graduate who had risen through the ranks despite facing discrimination common during that era. He was known for aggressive tactics, fearless leadership, and deep loyalty to his crew. During Johnston's commissioning ceremony, Evans addressed his crew directly, telling them that the ship would fight without question when called upon. that they would never retreat from superior forces, and that anyone not prepared for hard combat should transfer immediately. Nobody transferred. Evans trained his crew relentlessly during Johnston's shakedown period and initial operations. He emphasized damage control, gunnery accuracy, and coordinated attacks. He drilled his men on emergency procedures until they could respond instantly to any situation. He fostered esprit de corps, creating a crew that trusted their commander and each other absolutely. This training would prove essential during the desperate hours off Samar. Johnston had participated in numerous operations across the Pacific during 1944. The destroyer provided fire support during the Marshall Islands invasion, screened carriers during strikes against Truk, and supported landings in New Guinea. The ship had faced enemy air attacks, engaged shore batteries, and performed anti-submarine patrols. But Johnston had never faced enemy surface forces in ship-to-ship combat. That would change on October 25th. At approximately 06:45 on October 25th, lookouts aboard Taffy 3 ships spotted pagoda-style masts characteristic of Japanese battleships on the northern horizon. Initial identification seemed impossible. Japanese battleships should not be anywhere near Samar. Halsey's Third Fleet had departed north. Center force should have been crippled or withdrawn. Yet the masts were unmistakable, and they were approaching rapidly. Admiral Sprague aboard Fanshawe Bay confirmed identification within minutes. Center force had emerged from San Bernardino Strait undetected and was bearing down on Taffy 3 at high speed. Sprague faced immediate crisis. His escort carriers could not outrun Japanese battleships. His screening forces could not defeat center force in combat. His aircraft needed time to launch, arm, and attack. Without intervention, Kurita's battleships would close to gun range within an hour and systematically destroy every carrier in Taffy 3. Sprague made rapid decisions under extreme pressure. He ordered the carriers to turn southeast, away from the Japanese fleet, and increase to maximum speed. He directed all ships to make smoke, creating visual barriers between carriers and approaching Japanese warships. He ordered immediate launch of all available aircraft, regardless of ordnance loadout. He directed his screening vessels, the destroyers and destroyer escorts, to interpose themselves between the carriers and center force, conducting delaying actions to buy time for the carriers to escape. Commander Evans on Johnston's bridge received Sprague's orders and immediately understood the tactical situation. The destroyers were being asked to sacrifice themselves to save the carriers. They would face battleships and heavy cruisers in surface combat at point-blank range. Few, if any, screening ships would survive. But the mission was clear. Delay center force long enough for the carriers to escape, inflict whatever damage possible, and accept destruction as necessary cost. Evans made his decision before receiving specific attack orders. He would not wait passively while Japanese battleships closed range on the carriers. Johnston would attack immediately, independently, charging the enemy fleet before coordinated strikes could be organized. The destroyer would close to torpedo range at maximum speed, launch torpedoes, and engage with guns. Johnston would become the tip of the spear, the first American warship to engage center force, accepting whatever consequences followed. Evans ordered flank speed and called for a course directly toward the nearest Japanese heavy cruiser. Johnston's engineering spaces responded immediately, bringing boilers to maximum output. The destroyer surged forward, accelerating rapidly, bow wave building as the ship carved through morning seas. Smoke poured from the stacks as Johnston drove toward the enemy fleet at over 30 knots. The distance closed rapidly. Japanese lookouts spotted Johnston's approach, and heavy cruisers began maneuvering to bring guns to bear. The range dropped below 20,000 yards, then 15,000. Johnston continued closing, racing toward torpedo range against ships mounting 8-inch rifles capable of destroying destroyers with single salvos. At approximately 0710, Japanese cruisers opened fire. Large-caliber shells began landing around Johnston, throwing up towering water spouts. The Japanese gunners were finding the range. Evans maintained course, refusing to maneuver defensively, focused entirely on reaching torpedo range. The destroyer's 5-inch guns opened fire, engaging the nearest cruiser, shells from the destroyer's forward mounts arcing toward the enemy. Johnston's gun crews worked with precision, developed through months of training. Loaders slammed shells into breaches. Gunners tracked targets through optical sights. Fire control solutions updated continuously. The 5-inch shells could not penetrate heavy cruiser armor at this range, but they could damage superstructure, disable fire control systems, and harass the enemy. Johnston poured fire into the cruiser, forcing its crew to take cover, disrupting its shooting. The range continued dropping. 10,000 yards. 8,000. Japanese shells landed closer, their splashes drenching Johnston's deck. Shrapnel from near misses whistled through the air. The destroyer's crew remained at their stations, focused on their tasks, trusting Evans to bring them through. At approximately 0720, Johnston reached torpedo range. Evans ordered a turn to bring the ship's torpedo tubes to bear. The destroyer heeled sharply, presenting its broadside to the enemy. Torpedomen on deck prepared the Mark 15 torpedoes, checking settings, ensuring the weapons were ready to launch. Evans selected the heavy cruiser Kumano as primary target. The cruiser was closest, presenting optimal angle for torpedo attack. Evans gave the order. 10 torpedoes launched in rapid succession from Johnston's tubes, entering the water with splashes, motors engaging, propellers driving the weapons toward their target at 46 knots. The torpedoes ran hot, straight, and normal, leaving visible wakes across the sea surface. Japanese lookouts spotted the torpedo tracks, and Kumano began emergency turn, attempting to comb the wakes, presenting minimum profile to reduce hit probability. But Johnston had launched from close range with excellent firing solution. Kumano's turn came too late. Multiple torpedoes struck the cruiser's bow, massive explosions erupting as warheads detonated against the hull. The heavy cruiser shuddered from the impacts, its bow collapsing, fires erupting. Kumano's speed dropped immediately as flooding compromised forward compartments. The cruiser fell out of formation, disabled, no longer capable of maintaining pursuit of American carriers. Johnston had drawn first blood, crippling a heavy cruiser within minutes of engaging center force. But the destroyer was now deep inside the Japanese formation, surrounded by enemy warships, with no torpedoes remaining and facing overwhelming firepower. Evans turned Johnston south, attempting to rejoin Taffy 3's formation, and called for maximum speed. The destroyer raced away from center force, laying smoke, its guns continuing to fire at any Japanese vessel within range. Japanese battleships and cruisers concentrated fire on Johnston. The destroyer had demonstrated dangerous effectiveness and represented immediate threat requiring elimination. Multiple heavy ships poured fire at Johnston, shells from 14-inch and 8-inch guns churning the water around the destroyer. Evans maneuvered violently, turning and twisting to avoid the incoming fire, relying on the destroyer's superior agility to evade salvos from the larger, slower-turning Japanese vessels. For several minutes, Johnston's luck held. Japanese shells landed close, but scored no direct hits. The destroyer's crew maintained discipline, continuing their duties despite the terrifying spectacle of battleship shells exploding around them. But Probability favored the Japanese. With multiple ships firing, eventually their guns would find the target. At approximately 0730, three 14-inch shells from Japanese battleship Congo struck Johnston almost simultaneously. The shells tore into the destroyer's hull with devastating effect. The first shell penetrated the aft engine room, detonating inside, destroying machinery and killing everyone in the space instantly. The second shell struck the aft fire room, rupturing boilers, releasing superheated steam that killed more crew members. The third shell hit the bridge area, penetrating the pilot house, killing or wounding most personnel on the bridge. Commander Evans was badly wounded in the attack. Shrapnel tore into his body, severing 2 fingers on his left hand and inflicting serious injuries to his torso and legs. The ship's executive officer was killed instantly. Many other bridge personnel were killed or wounded. Johnston's speed dropped immediately as the aft engine room was destroyed. The destroyer began losing way, slowing, vulnerable to further attack. But Johnston did not stop fighting. Evans remained conscious despite his wounds and continued commanding his ship. Damage control parties below decks fought fires, shored up bulkheads, and attempted to restore power. The engineering crew bypassed damaged systems, rerouting steam and power through undamaged lines. Within minutes, Johnston's remaining engine room brought the forward engine back online. The destroyer began moving again, making approximately 17 knots on one engine. Johnston's guns never stopped firing. The forward 3 5-inch mounts remained operational. Gunnery crews continued engaging Japanese warships, shifting fire between targets, maintaining rapid fire despite the destruction around them. The aft guns were disabled by the hits, but the forward battery kept up steady fire, harassing center forces' advance. Evans refused medical attention, remaining on the bridge despite his wounds. He established communications with the forward stations, assessed damage, and determined Johnston could still fight. The destroyer had lost half its power, most of its communications gear, and many crew members. But 3 guns remained operational, the ship could maneuver, and the crew's fighting spirit was unbroken. At approximately 0750, Admiral Sprague ordered the destroyers to conduct a coordinated torpedo attack against center force. Johnston, Howell, and Heermann would charge the Japanese fleet together, launching torpedoes and engaging with guns to disrupt the enemy advance. Samuel B. Roberts, technically a destroyer escort rather than fleet destroyer, joined the attack despite being smaller and less heavily armed than the fleet destroyers. Evans had already attacked independently, expending Johnston's torpedoes, but he immediately maneuvered to join Howell and Heermann in their attack run. Johnston would engage with guns, drawing fire from the other destroyers, adding weight to the coordinated assault. The damaged destroyer turned toward center force again, increasing to maximum speed on its one operational engine, and charged back into the battle. The 3 destroyers plus Samuel B. Roberts raced toward the Japanese fleet in one of the most desperate attacks in naval history. They faced 4 battleships and multiple cruisers, ships mounting guns that could destroy destroyers with single salvos. The American vessels were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing certain destruction. But they attacked anyway, bows pointed directly at the enemy, closing at maximum speed. Japanese battleships and cruisers focused devastating fire on the attacking destroyers. Shells landed around the American ships in curtains of explosions. Howell was hit repeatedly, flames erupting from multiple compartments. Heermann dodged between shell splashes, weaving violently. Samuel B. Roberts charged forward despite taking hits. Johnston, already damaged, attracted concentrated fire due to its earlier success against Kumano. More shells struck Johnston. 8-inch shells from Japanese cruisers punched through the destroyer's thin hull plating. One shell penetrated the forward magazine, starting fires that threatened to detonate stored ammunition. Damage control parties flooded the magazine, preventing catastrophic explosion, but the flooding reduced the ship's buoyancy. Another shell destroyed Johnston's forward fire control, forcing gun crews to shift to local control, sighting and firing manually without central fire direction. Despite mounting damage, Johnston closed to within 10,000 yards of Japanese battleships and opened fire with its 3 operational guns. The destroyer's shells could not penetrate battleship armor at any range, but they could damage superstructure, destroy radar and fire control equipment, and kill exposed personnel. Johnston poured fire into the nearest battleship, forcing it to maneuver, disrupting its shooting, creating confusion in the Japanese formation. Hole and Heermann launched their torpedoes at close range. Japanese battleships maneuvered violently to avoid the torpedo spreads, turning away, breaking formation, losing speed. Samuel B. Roberts closed to suicidal range and launched its 3 torpedoes, then continued engaging with its 2 5-inch guns until Japanese shells silenced the destroyer escort. Samuel B. Roberts sank shortly after, taking most of its crew down with it. The coordinated destroyer attack achieved its objective. Center forces' advance slowed as battleships maneuvered to avoid torpedoes. Japanese formation cohesion broke down as individual ships took independent action to evade attacks. The heavy cruisers, which should have been leading the pursuit of American carriers, were forced to maneuver defensively. Minutes of delay accumulated, providing critical time for Taffy 3's escort carriers to increase distance from their pursuers. But the cost was terrible. Hole was sinking, its hull torn open by multiple hits, fires raging throughout the ship. Samuel B. Roberts was gone. Johnston was badly damaged, slowing, losing buoyancy as flooding spread through damaged compartments. Heermann survived relatively intact, but had expended all torpedoes and was low on ammunition. At approximately 0820, Johnston's situation deteriorated further. Japanese cruiser Congo, the same battleship that had inflicted earlier damage, found Johnston with another salvo. 3 more 14-inch shells struck the destroyer in rapid succession. One shell penetrated the forward engine room, destroying the last operational engine. Johnston lost all power immediately. The destroyer began drifting, dead in the water, unable to maneuver or fight effectively. The second and third shells struck the forward sections, one detonating in the forward magazine despite earlier flooding efforts, the other tearing through crew compartments. Fires erupted throughout the ship. The destroyer began listing to port as flooding overwhelmed damage control efforts. Johnston was dying, its hull too damaged to save, its power gone, its ability to fight nearly exhausted. Commander Evans, still conscious despite his wounds and weakened from blood loss, assessed the situation. Johnston could no longer contribute to the battle. The ship was sinking. The responsible decision was to order abandon ship, giving the crew maximum time to evacuate before Johnston went under. Evans gave the order. Crew members began abandoning ship in orderly fashion, despite the chaos and destruction around them. They helped wounded shipmates, distributed life jackets, prepared life rafts. Discipline held even as the ship settled lower in the water. Men jumped from the sides, swimming away from the sinking vessel to avoid being pulled under when it finally sank. Johnston's remaining gun crews kept firing until Japanese shells destroyed the last operational mount. Even as the ship was sinking, even with abandoned ship ordered, the gunners stayed at their stations, loading and firing, engaging the enemy until physically unable to continue. This defiance epitomized the destroyer's spirit throughout the battle. At approximately 0945, USS Johnston rolled onto its side and sank. The destroyer had fought for over 3 hours, sustained dozens of hits from shells ranging from 5-inch to 14-inch, disabled a heavy cruiser, drew fire away from carriers and other screening vessels, participated in coordinated attacks that disrupted Center Force's advance, and fought until the ship literally could not float anymore. Commander Evans was last seen on Johnston's bridge as the ship rolled over. He did not abandon ship with his crew. Whether he was too badly wounded to evacuate or chose to remain with his command is unknown. He went down with Johnston, joining the approximately 186 officers and men killed during the battle. 141 crew members survived, rescued by American ships after hours in the water. While Johnston fought its final battle, the other ships of Taffy III continued desperate resistance against Center Force. The escort carriers launched every available aircraft, sending them against Japanese battleships and cruisers in repeated attacks. The planes carried whatever ordnance they had, dropping bombs and torpedoes intended for ground support against heavily armored warships. When ammunition ran out, pilots made dry runs, flying attack profiles without weapons to harass Japanese ships and force them to maneuver. The other destroyers and destroyer escorts continued engaging despite mounting losses. Hirman survived the battle but expended all ammunition fighting Japanese cruisers at point-blank range. The destroyer escorts Raymond, Dennis, and John C. Butler made torpedo attacks and engaged with guns despite being smaller and less capable than fleet destroyers. They fought with courage matching Johnston's, accepting terrible risks to protect the carriers. The escort carriers themselves fought back with their minimal armament. 5-inch guns mounted on the carriers' sterns engaged Japanese cruisers at ranges where the carriers could actually see enemy ships with naked eyes. The carriers' gun crews scored hits on Japanese vessels despite the carriers' main purpose being aviation platforms rather than surface combatants. Aircraft from other Taffy groups joined the battle, attacking Center Force from multiple directions. Land-based Army Air Force's bombers launched from Philippine bases added to the assault. The cumulative effect of hundreds of aircraft attacks, torpedo runs by destroyers, and gun engagements by desperate screening forces created chaos in the Japanese formation. Vice Admiral Kurita, aboard Yamato, faced confusion about the tactical situation. His force had expected to encounter unprotected cargo ships and transports in Leyte Gulf. Instead, they faced fierce resistance from forces that fought with unexpected aggression. Japanese commanders initially misidentified the escort carriers as fleet carriers, believing they faced elements of Halsey's Third Fleet rather than the smaller Taffy units. This misidentification influenced Japanese tactical decisions. The ferocious American resistance, the constant air attacks, the aggressive destroyer charges, and the confusion about enemy force composition caused Kurita to question his mission's prospects for success. At approximately 0925, with Johnston sinking and American resistance seemingly unbroken, Kurita made a fateful decision. He ordered Center Force to break off the attack and withdraw north through San Bernardino Strait. This decision remains controversial among military historians. Center Force had suffered damage, but retained substantial combat power. Yamato and other battleships were largely undamaged. The Japanese force still possessed overwhelming firepower advantage over Taffy III. Continuing the attack might have resulted in destruction of multiple American carriers and successful penetration into Leyte Gulf, where thousands of American troops and ships were vulnerable. But Kurita believed he faced stronger opposition than actually existed. He had no knowledge that Halsey's Third Fleet was hundreds of miles north, chasing Japanese carriers. He thought the fierce resistance came from fleet carriers and heavy screening forces. He believed American reinforcements were approaching. Fuel concerns, damage to multiple ships, and the relentless air attacks contributed to his decision to withdraw. The battle off Samar ended with Center Force's withdrawal. Taffy 3 had survived despite impossible odds. The escort carriers escaped destruction. The invasion forces in Leyte Gulf remained protected. The sacrifice of Johnston, Howell, Samuel B. Roberts, and Gambier Bay, combined with the courage of every ship and aircraft in Taffy 3, had achieved strategic victory. But the cost was measured in lives and ships. Johnston lost 186 men, including Commander Evans. Howell lost 253 officers and men. Samuel B. Roberts lost 89. Gambier Bay, the only carrier sunk during the battle, lost 130. Over 750 American sailors and officers died during 3 hours of combat off Samar. The survivors of Johnston spent hours in the water before rescue. They clung to debris and life rafts, many wounded, all exhausted. Japanese destroyers passed close by some survivor groups, but did not engage. One Japanese destroyer captain saluted the survivors as his ship steamed past, acknowledging their courage. American ships began rescue operations during the afternoon and continued through the following day, recovering Johnston's survivors along with men from other sunken vessels. The rescued Johnston crew members told stories of Commander Evans' leadership during the battle. They described how he refused to leave the bridge despite his wounds, how he continued commanding the ship even as it was sinking, how his aggressive tactics and fighting spirit inspired the entire crew. They spoke of his final moments on the bridge as Johnston rolled over, standing alone, fulfilling the promise he had made during commissioning that he would fight without question when called upon. The strategic implications of the battle off Samar were enormous. Had Center Force reached Leyte Gulf, Japanese battleships and cruisers could have devastated American amphibious shipping, destroyed supplies on the beaches, and killed thousands of American soldiers. The invasion of the Philippines might have been delayed for months. The Pacific War's timeline could have been significantly altered. Instead, Taffy 3's desperate resistance stopped Center Force cold. The invasion proceeded successfully. American forces secured the Philippines over the following months, severing Japan's access to Southeast Asian resources. The strategic situation that Japan had fought desperately to prevent came to pass. The battle off Samar was Japan's last serious attempt to inflict strategic defeat on American forces through surface naval action. Commander Ernest Evans received the Medal of Honor posthumously for his actions during the battle off Samar. The citation praised his extraordinary heroism, inspiring leadership, and valiant fighting spirit. Evans became the first Native American in the United States Navy to receive the Medal of Honor. His Cherokee heritage and his rise through the naval ranks despite discrimination make his story particularly significant. USS Johnston received the Presidential Unit Citation, one of the highest awards a naval unit can receive. The citation recognized the ship's extraordinary heroism and exceptionally meritorious conduct in combat. Johnston's aggressive attacks against overwhelming odds, its success in damaging enemy vessels, and its contribution to saving Taffy 3 earned the destroyer permanent place in naval history. The battle off Samar entered U.S. Navy tradition as an example of destroyer aggressiveness, courage under fire, and willingness to engage superior forces to accomplish the mission. The battle demonstrates principles that remain central to naval warfare: initiative, aggressive action, accepting calculated risks, and fighting spirit can overcome material disadvantages. Destroyer tactics employed at Samar influenced subsequent naval doctrine. The aggressive independent action by Johnston, charging ahead of coordinated attacks, demonstrated that waiting for perfect coordination sometimes sacrifices critical opportunities. The willingness to close to suicidal range to launch torpedoes and engage with guns showed that destroyers could significantly impact battles against much larger opponents if handled boldly. The battle also demonstrated importance of training and crew cohesion. Johnston's crew performed superbly under impossible conditions because Evans had trained them relentlessly, because they trusted their commander, and because they functioned as a unified team. Damage control parties kept the ship fighting despite repeated hits. Gun crews maintained fire despite casualties. The engineering crew restored power after catastrophic damage. Every department performed beyond expectations because training had prepared them for exactly these circumstances. Modern naval officers study the Battle off Samar as an example of leadership under extreme pressure. Evans made critical decisions rapidly with incomplete information, accepting terrible risks to accomplish his mission. His personal courage inspired his crew to fight beyond normal human limits. His tactical judgment, charging the enemy independently before coordinated attacks developed, achieved surprise and inflicted damage before Japanese forces fully reacted. The wreck of USS Johnston was located in October 2019 by expedition led by Victor Vescovo. The wreck lies in approximately 21,000 feet of water off Samar Island, one of the deepest shipwreck discoveries ever made. Sonar images show the destroyer's hull on the seafloor, gun mounts visible, the ship's structure remarkably intact considering the violence of its sinking. The discovery of Johnston's wreck renewed interest in the battle off Samar and the destroyer's story. Documentaries, books, and articles examined the battle in detail, ensuring that Johnston's sacrifice and the courage of its crew would not be forgotten. Veterans organizations and naval historical societies commemorated the 75th anniversary of the battle, honoring the men who fought and died off Samar. The Battle off Samar represents the type of engagement that defines naval tradition. A handful of ships facing impossible odds, accepting certain destruction to protect others, fighting with courage that transcended rational calculation. Johnston exemplified this spirit completely. The destroyer charged battleships knowing it would die. The crew fought until the ship literally could not fight anymore. Commander Evans led from the front, refused to surrender or retreat, and paid the ultimate price for his courage. Naval historians compare the battle off Samar to other legendary last stands in military history. The parallels to Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans held a Persian army, or to the Alamo, where 200 defenders fought Mexican forces, are striking. In each case, a small force faced overwhelming odds, fought to the death, and achieved strategic impact beyond their numbers. But Samar differs in one critical respect. The defenders won. Taffy 3 survived. The carriers escaped. The invasion continued. Unlike Thermopylae or the Alamo, where the defenders died but their causes suffered immediate defeat, at Samar, the sacrifice achieved its objective. Johnston and the other lost ships bought time and inflicted damage that caused center force to withdraw. The tactical defeat, the loss of ships and men, resulted in strategic victory. This outcome validates the aggressive tactics Evans employed. Had Johnston remained with the carriers, laying smoke and waiting for coordinated attacks, center force might have closed range and destroyed carriers before effective resistance developed. Evans' independent charge disrupted Japanese formations immediately, scored early success against Kumano, and demonstrated that American forces would fight aggressively rather than flee. This set the tone for the entire battle. The destroyer's name lives on in the United States Navy. The name Johnston has been assigned to multiple vessels since World War II, honoring the Fletcher-class destroyer and its crew. Each ship bearing the name carries responsibility to uphold the standards of courage and fighting spirit established off Samar in October 1944. USS Johnston's story resonates because it represents ideals that transcend military service. The willingness to sacrifice for others, to face impossible odds for noble purposes. to maintain honor and duty when easier paths exist. These values apply to civilian life as much as military service. Johnston's crew could have fled. They could have broken under pressure. They could have surrendered when their ship was crippled. Instead, they fought until physically unable to continue, maintaining discipline and purpose until the end. Commander Evans embodied leadership at its finest. He trained his crew before battle. He made rapid decisions under extreme pressure. He led from the front, sharing every danger. He refused medical attention while his crew needed him. He remained at his post when he could have saved himself. These actions inspired his crew to fight beyond normal human limits and earned Evans eternal respect. The Cherokee Nation recognizes Evans as a hero who brought honor to his heritage while serving his country. His success, despite discrimination he faced, demonstrates character and determination. His rise to command a warship represented achievement rare for Native Americans during that era. His conduct in battle reflected values emphasized in Cherokee tradition: courage, loyalty, protecting the community, fighting for what is right. The Battle off Samar teaches lessons about courage, leadership, and sacrifice that remain relevant decades later. The battle shows that material advantages do not guarantee victory, that aggressive action can overcome superior firepower, that well-trained, motivated forces can achieve results far beyond theoretical calculations, that courage and determination matter as much as ships and guns. USS Johnston fought for 3 hours against impossible odds. The destroyer disabled a heavy cruiser, disrupted a battleship force, drew fire away from carriers, participated in coordinated attacks, and fought until sinking. 186 men died, but their sacrifice helped save thousands. The ship and crew accomplished their mission completely. They protected the carriers. They delayed center force. They demonstrated the destroyer spirit that defines American naval tradition. The aluminum hull of Johnston lies in crushing depths off Samar, entombed in darkness, a monument to courage. The ship rests alongside Hole, Samuel B. Roberts, and Gambier Bay, all lost during the same desperate battle. These wrecks mark where American sailors made their last stand, where they fought battleships with destroyers, where they charged toward certain death to save others. Visitors to naval museums can see artifacts from Johnston and its sister ships. Photographs show Commander Evans and his crew. Documents detail the battle sequence. Models display Fletcher-class destroyers in their wartime configuration. These exhibits preserve memory of the battle and honor those who fought. But the true memorial to USS Johnston exists in naval tradition, in the stories told to new sailors, in the values emphasized during training, in the spirit of aggressiveness that defines destroyer forces. Every naval officer learns about the battle off Samar, about Johnston's charge against battleships, about Evans's leadership, about the crew's courage. The story becomes part of naval identity, shaping how sailors think about duty, honor, and sacrifice. USS Johnston displaced 2,100 tons, carried 5 5-inch guns, and mounted 10 torpedo tubes. The destroyer was a speck compared to Japanese battleships. In rational terms, Johnston should have been annihilated within minutes of engaging center force. But wars are not won by rational calculations alone. They are won by courage, by fighting spirit, by willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. Johnston proved that small ships handled aggressively can impact battles far beyond their size, that destroyers charging battleships, accepting terrible odds, can change tactical situations, that crews fighting with courage and determination can achieve impossible things, that leadership matters more than tonnage, The destroyer that charged battleships earned immortality through 3 hours of combat off Samar Island. USS Johnston's story will be told as long as naval services value courage, as long as militaries honor sacrifice, as long as humans admire those willing to face death for noble purposes. 126 symbols marked Lucky Perky's fuselage. 186 men died aboard Johnston. Different services, different theaters, different types of combat. But both stories share common themes: courage under impossible circumstances, leadership that inspired beyond ordinary limits, sacrifice for purposes greater than self, and the determination to accomplish the mission regardless of cost. These are the stories that matter, that teach us what humans can accomplish when tested, that remind us of values worth preserving. USS Johnston and its crew gave everything off Samar. They could have fled. They could have retreated. They chose to fight. They chose to charge battleships knowing they would die. They chose courage over survival. And because they chose courage, thousands of others survived. The destroyer's guns fell silent 79 years ago. Commander Evans and most of his crew rest in eternal depths off Samar. But their legacy continues, carried forward in naval tradition, in the values taught to new generations, in the spirit that defines those who serve. USS Johnston's story transcends naval history, becoming a testament to human courage that resonates across decades, inspiring all who learn of the destroyer that charged a fleet and fought until it could fight no more.